All right, Chris Peaks here tonight with my man Chris Haggis. Getting ready to talk a little college football. Seems like it rolls around so quick, man. Just as soon as one Saturday ends, another one begins. How are you, man? What's
Good, but you make a good point. I mean, it feels like we just kicked off and the season's already about half over. We're at the halfway point this week.
so?
So,
I want to. I know I usually say this, but I can't right now. I want to go ahead and get the 800-pound grill out of the room to me. Uh, is Bama sending a message to the West? I mean, the way they started putting this together, that they're beginning to become the team that they're supposed to be, or it
I,
might get a
I,
little
w- I
ahead.
would say don't give up on them yet. And, you know,
You say don't give up. You mean don't give up on winning the East, or don't give up, or don't give up on being a great team? Because
both.
I'm
I
I'm looking
mean,
at
don't just, I mean,
don't
look,
get my hopes up.
I would say that until you string together about 3, 4 years straight of Alabama not being contenders, they're gonna be contenders every year.
But I mean this team in particular. Are
This
they
team, yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I mean,
are they finally putting it together?
this program is far from being irrelevant. You know, just
Oh
because
yeah, but
they had a few bad games with a bunch of inexperienced players and new people.
and I don't think they was really bad. That they really played that bad. It's what some people
Well,
did. It just
I
you
I,
know.
I think that people overreacted to the Texas game,
I
and
own North and the was it North Texas?
South Florida, which
The Tennessee.
I think that we remember Saban's infamous rat poison speech,
Yeah.
and you know when people rag on them, you know it gets in their heads, it defeats their confidence, and when I think Saban showed that he's still effective as a coach. I felt like he knew what he was doing the whole time during that South Florida game. You
I've never
know,
doubted him for 1 minute, man. I mean,
yeah.
I've never,
And I mean, hey, look,
when the naysayers started, I've never
we
doubted
haven't
him.
had more than a two-loss season in 13 years.
Um,
What do you want? What do
yeah,
you want?
the South Florida game, 17-3 or something. The was it Middle Tennessee State, in Texas game. Um, yeah, I know you're probably too young to remember this. Maybe you could have, but Alabama fans today would probably have already hung him because back when Gene Stallings was Alabama, and the only thing he did was win, but it was 13-0, 16-6, 17-9. There was not these blowout games. I mean, they
Yeah,
destroyed.
the Stallings offenses weren't going to put 40 points on the board, but I mean,
Right.
neither were any other offenses back in those days.
Yeah, because there was such a myth that people believed. They didn't realize that when Sprayer came into the league, they thought he was throwing the ball 80% of the time. He
Mm,
wasn't throwing the ball 80% of the time. He was just half and half.
mm,
We'd just been so used to the other coaches running the ball 85% of the time. I mean, nobody threw it then. And
yeah,
but anyway, so let's get into the games this week, man. You pick out where you want to start at.
I would like to start with Oklahoma and Texas.
Um,
Let's
I
go
think
big or
Texas.
go home.
I think Texas blows them out.
You think what?
I think Texas drills them.
Think so?
Yeah.
All right. So I got Oklahoma schedule pulled up, and there's two reactions I have to reviewing this schedule. One, that although Oklahoma's 5-0, they're completely untested. I mean, Arkansas State, SMU, Tulsa, Cincinnati, Iowa State, completely untested. They put a lot of points on the board, but completely unchallenged. It's in Texas. I think I think Oklahoma hangs in, but Texas does pull out in the end. But here's another thing. Following Texas, they have UCF, Kansas, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, BYU, and TCU.
Oh my God! If they get past that game, they could be undefeated.
But let's say they drop to Texas. They're a one-loss team. You know what that means, right? Probably going to be a rematch. So that could create a
What?
very interesting situation for those two teams last season in the Big 12.
Yeah, it would be fitting though. Their last season in the Big 12 if they played for the championship.
Mm-hmm. The two of them, yeah. I don't really see Texas losing to anyone in the Big 12. I mean, Oklahoma's got the best chance, but I don't see, you know, the other previous years power teams, TCU, Baylor, they're not there this year.
No,
Not there
no.
at all. Yeah, I
And
mean,
Miles has been, really been dominant.
I don't see them doing. I don't see Texas losing in the Big 12. I think that, and it also creates a very interesting situation for college football playoff because say Texas beats Oklahoma in the regular season, and then they play Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship. Say
Got two
Oklahoma
one loss.
beats Texas in the Big 12 championship. They both have one loss against each other. Who do you put in?
That is a good question. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
don't
I
think
think
you
they'll take
can.
them both.
I
I
mean,
mean, I honestly think they would take them both and leave
I don't
out.
know. I mean, if you've got there's a lot of things that's got to play out to
You
see
can
that.
eliminate the ACC this year.
Okay,
I think.
I'll go on
I
that.
think you can. So you take the SEC champion, you take the Big Ten champion, you take Texas and Oklahoma.
What if you've got an
But the
undefeated SEC
Pac-12,
champion and a one?
I
What if you've got a one loss SEC team and an undefeated champion? I mean,
yeah
but here's the thing
I
too.
think
I don't
if
think
Oklahoma drops both games, they're
right,
out.
but I don't think
The
you can go by who wins the
Pac-12
championship game.
Pac-12 is a wild card because you know how I feel about the Pac-12. You
We feel the
know,
same
I
about
don't
the
think it's a stiff competition, and I think they're going to get blown out if they play a playoff game. But right now, the top 10 is completely overpopulated with Pac 12 teams, and the Pac 12 has a distinct advantage as they're in their Pac 12 and they only play other Pac 12 teams. So they don't have anybody who could take them out before the postseason. So it's going to create a very controversial dynamic. I almost wish this was the year of expansion rather than next year because I think that there's going to be at least six teams that really need to be there. And
yeah, because
unfortunately,
there's
only four
nobody.
can go.
Yeah, in years past, there's been two teams that's been head and shoulders above the rest, but it's not like that this year. I
Not
mean, you've got.
like that at all.
Let me ask you one quick question though. It's kind of, it's on the subject. You mentioned expansion. I thought they needed to be expansion, but is 16 teams? Is that not too many? I mean, I thought
That's too
eight.
many. I think it should be eight.
Yeah, okay. I mean, and
I
I
mean,
even
and
went.
I don't know what that's going to look like. Is there going to be 4 to 6 teams with a bye?
I
I
thought there's
mean,
gonna be
I
four
don't.
teams. But see, I was originally thinking it would be a 16 playoff. Number one and two teams would get a bye, and you'd play it from there. 16. I mean, but it's going to be revenue. It's going to kill the rest of the bowl games, but
Yeah.
it's what it is. All right, who you got next, my man?
All right. Let's save Alabama and A&M. Oh, here is an interesting matchup: Kentucky and Georgia. Kentucky and
I've
Georgia.
been waiting for this one since last year. I think last year was 16 to
Okay.
6.
So here's the advantage that Georgia has. Georgia has the advantage that they're at home.
Yep.
Kentucky has the advantage that Georgia sucks. So,
All right, let me get you something else there too.
mhm.
Kentucky's hungry. This team has been getting
Dude,
close. This team has been winning.
Georgia is favored by 14.5. If there's betting people out there,
I would jump all over Kentucky
I would jump all over that not to cover. They
because
are not going to beat them by 14.5.
well,
They
I've,
will not
I've
cover
been
that
taught
spread.
over about the last 5 years, four or 5 years. I've watched this team go from a 7-5 team to a 9-3 to that 10-3 team to a team that's been hovering there. This is they got the athletes there now. They believe they can win. I watched them a couple of years ago when Georgia was blowing them out 34 in the games, and the scores kept getting closer. And I think last year it was 16 to 6 or 16 to 3, and they were in that game into the fourth quarter. Um, you know, I think it's a toss up. I mean, I'm I think Kentucky's going to be hard for Georgia to beat even at home.
All right. So we've got to be consistent in our arguments. My argument with Oklahoma was that they were untested.
Yeah.
With the exception of Florida, Kentucky's pretty weak.
Well, who's Georgia played? South
Georgia, well, I
Carolina.
mean, they've done a little better. They got Auburn in, weren't they in Auburn? And then they got South Carolina. I believe that was also on the
I
road,
think
wasn't it?
there's, but how good? I think, but the question is, yeah, they had Auburn, but how good is this Auburn team? I mean,
But I mean, we're talking about Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, and Vanderbilt. I
true.
mean, that's the bottom of the barrel, and these aren't enormous margins. 28-17 over Eastern, 35-3 over Akron,
But but
45
one thing I've always
28.
said,
They let Vanderbilt hang 28 on.
well, one thing I've always said about
Mm-hmm.
football, and I've heard people say
Mm-hmm.
you can't compare scores.
Hey, you know what? It's like Kurt Russell's character said in the movie Miracle. He said, 9 games out of 10, the Russians beat us, but not tonight. Tonight, anything can happen. And that is very true. We can look at these things to come up with a decent prediction, but at the end of the day, stats, predictions, strength of schedule, all those things don't matter. You've still got to go put 11 guys up against another 11 guys on a patch of grass, and they've got to fight it out. And
If
when that situation at the start of every game, so I had a coach that used to say, at the start of every game, our record is 0-0. Tonight is what matters. We're winning tonight. We're not worried about our 2-4 schedule or our 6-0 schedule. Tonight we're 0-0,
if
and
if
that.
Kentucky beats Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
do they now have to be considered as a legitimate national championship contender for this season?
No, they do not have to be. And the reason I say that is this. This is not the last 2 years of Georgia. This is a different Georgia team.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they beat Tennessee, Georgia and Tennessee too, then you need to consider them legitimate contenders for the SEC title. And if they waltz into Atlanta undefeated, I don't know if they can win that game, whoever's in it. I don't know. Because who's
But if
going
they
to be
won't
in
get,
that
let's
game?
say they
And
won't get
who
there.
are they going to be by that game? You know?
But then you get into a thing that you're talking about Oklahoma, Texas.
Mm.
Do you leave a 12-1 Kentucky team out that maybe loses to uh, a one-loss
I
Alabama
kind of,
team or a one-loss Texas A&M team?
even though my team, Alabama, has been the beneficiaries of the, not necessarily needing to win your conference to automatically qualify.
Well, they won two national championships.
I like the champions going. I like the SEC champions going. If we end up with a 2-loss Alabama or LSU beating Kentucky, I think with the competition you got out there this year, I don't think either one of them are in. I mean,
Well, it's
a
made.
16 playoff, yeah. A 4, no.
What it's done is
Mm-hmm.
it's made the conference championship. It's defeated what it was originally made for. It's made it irrelevant because that year
Yeah.
when Alabama beat Georgia, Alabama needed that week off because they were
Mm-hmm.
beat up. They did not need to go in there and play Georgia. I mean, they needed that week off.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about what Auburn just did. They had just played Georgia, Alabama, Georgia. And had they won that game, their schedule would have been Georgia, Alabama, Georgia, Alabama.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, you can't.
another thing people don't really talk about in that game is Alabama were down their 2 starting corners and their 2 starting receivers. That's big,
Now, are you
and
talking about that year against Auburn?
say again.
Are you talking about that year against Auburn?
No, against Georgia in the
Oh, for the
national
national
championship.
championship?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
After they
yeah,
beat them in that SEC
yeah,
championship.
and
Yeah,
yeah, and yeah,
both
it's
starting corners,
still.
both starting wide receivers, and with a minute left in the game, they were down 8 with a chance to drive down the field and tie it.
They led for so long. I mean, they led
Mhm.
that game. I mean, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that was
So
one of the most grittiest performances I've seen by a team.
undoubtedly, that's when I love being able to feel good about your team when they lose, and that was one
I
of those.
said that about
And
that too, but I did not
mhm,
feel. I did not, even though they lost. I mean, they were still winners in my eyes because
mhm,
they had a refuse to lose mentality
mhm.
in that
And
game.
I
I
think
mean,
a lot of people make moans about it because that late pick 6 makes the score look
yeah,
worse than it was. It's like, hey, you had a young quarterback on a game-winning drive. He threw a bad pass and got a pick 6. That's not getting blown out. I'm sorry.
no,
You
no,
know,
no. The
yeah.
Alabama put up, yeah.
The
I
way
was,
I look at it, any score in less than a minute, maybe even less than 2 minutes, doesn't count. So
right.
I really don't like kind of like when Alabama beat Notre Dame 42-14. I don't really consider Notre Dame's 14 legitimate. That was 42-0, buddy. I mean that anytime a team racks up garbage time, you know, touchdowns, I don't really consider it. And in that case, hey, the guy was trying to win the game. Young quarterback threw a pick 6. It doesn't mean they got blown out by 15
No,
points.
Alabama did not. No, yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
Alabama did not get blown out of
So,
that game. Um,
um, well, let's where were we? Okay, so we're at Kentucky and Georgia. Um, I gotta ask the question though. Kentucky's got one of the toughest schedules in the NCAA. They've got Georgia at home. Well, on the road. I'm sorry. They got Georgia on the road. They've got Tennessee at home, and then they've got Alabama at home.
That's a tough road right there to hoe, man. I
That's
mean,
a tougher because I mean, here's
if
my
they
question.
came through that undefeated and lost an SEC championship game, it would be hard to leave them
Yeah,
out if they were 12-1.
yeah.
I
If
mean,
well, if they have those wins, yeah. But I like the way they asserted themselves in the Florida game. And, I think there's an expectation in, this modern college football world where, like, the team is judged on the way they play the first and second and third games of the year. So there's no room for this growth and maturity. And, you know, who's to say that the same team that played the second week of the season is going to be the same team playing in the last game of the season? There's a lot of room for growth and maturity in that time frame. You look at, the 2013 Auburn team, dropped an early game, and then
you
came
know
back and matured
that
into.
you know what that game that that turned their season around is, yeah, they lost it, but if they were down 21-0 to LSU at the half, and they came back and lost that game 21-14,
Mhm.
and just the way, because I listened to their players in the locker room, and the way they were responding, that turned that even in defeat, that
Mhm.
was a victory almost for them, because that
Yeah.
put they believe that. Now,
And
of course,
Auburn's a weird school, man. It really is because the year they were 2-10, they lost to LSU 12
had
to 10.
they beat LSU in that game,
Yeah.
that if they had they beat LSU, that turns into an 8-14,
Hmm.
because I firmly believe that there are those games like that
Hmm.
make or break your season.
Well,
Because
it goes back to what we were saying about how, hey, you can put on whatever courage you need for the big game. They know they're going to be challenged, but I mean, this is a team that was losing their cupcake game.
right,
I mean, it was. I mean, they
um,
had two wins that year: one over Louisiana Monroe in overtime, and then one over Sam Houston State. That was their only two wins that entire year.
I thought they beat like Alabama A&M.
Pretty sure it was Sam Houston.
You may be right. It kind of reminds me of, I think it was the COVID year when Big Pimpin got fired at LSU. But I remember LSU was coming to Alabama, and they had, between the players that was opting out and COVID, they had 9 starters out on defense.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, man, we are fixing to lay the lumber to them. And it was like 20-14. I mean, having to hold off a LSU late minute drive. I
Yeah, as
mean,
good as that 2020 Alabama team was, they had some games that were a little closer than they should have been. But
Florida should have beat them in that championship game. If all will be all
well,
honest.
when Dickerson got hurt, that offensive line just collapsed. That Florida's another one of those teams that really progresses. They have had so many years where they kind of start off and they're kind of shaky, but they finish the year pretty strong. I don't know.
All right, so what we got next?
Well, man, looking over the schedule, this is really a 3-game weekend to me. It's those two, and then it's Alabama and A&M. I
There's
mean,
nothing in the Big Ten going on or anything.
yeah, I mean, Michigan's playing Minnesota, Ohio State. Well, Ohio State and Maryland. It might be one worth looking into. I don't really know enough about Maryland to really speak
So
into it, but
let's get into it then,
why has
man.
Ohio State only played 4 games?
I don't know. Let's jump into it. I mean, this is this the make or break game for Jimbo? I mean,
Are we going to Alabama A&M?
if that's the only three, let's just go ahead and, because I mean,
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't think so.
I mean, somebody was telling me, was arguing the other day that his job depends on beating Alabama. I said,
I don't
no.
think so. Now, if they come
I
in
said,
and just blow them out, if
if
they
he
come
beats
in and win,
Alabama,
yeah, you remember there was that one year that Alabama and A&M was supposed to be a pretty good little contest, and they rolled in and just beat them like 56-0.
oh God,
You
yeah,
know,
I remember that.
yeah. I mean, if something like that happens, then maybe. But if this is a competitive game, Alabama is only favored by 2 points, and I think that's pretty close. I'm actually going to call Bama less than a touchdown. I think it may end up being like 3, 4 points, maybe even six, couple field goals, but I think less than 7 points is going to
I
be
don't,
the victory margin.
I don't think Jimbo's job necessarily hangs on the Alabama game.
I don't think so. I think it
Let's
hangs.
say,
If he drops it, I think it hangs on the reaction.
let's say,
If he
like,
goes and drops
let me
three
show you
more
a couple.
games this
Let me show
year,
you
then they're going to
a
fire him.
couple scenarios. Let's say he beats Alabama and then loses four straight. Or loses five.
I
It
mean,
has a collapse between six and
I
six.
think
That would
that
get him fired. But
as long as they
if he
perform
loses,
well, he's fine. But if they come in and get blown out, that would put him in jeopardy. If they lose a close game and then he can't rebound, because that to me says a lot about a coach being able to rebound his team after a loss. And if he goes in and does like he's done in previous years and drops 2 or 3 more games, I think they will say, you know what,
I mean,
the
is there a
road,
magic
Jimbo.
number on it though? I
I'll be
mean,
honest with you. I
I
don't
think
think Jimbo should have ever left Florida State.
see, I'm looking at it like this. All right, because when the guy was talking about it, I was bringing up these different scenarios. I said, yeah, what if he beats Alabama and then collapses and goes 6-6? Um,
Mm.
what if he loses to Alabama but finishes 9-3 or 10-2? But what if he beats Alabama and then goes 8-4? I mean,
All right, so
honestly,
he's
I
dropped
don't.
one. Okay, here's what the telling factor is. Okay, their one loss right now. It's going to be the quality of loss. If he loses to Alabama and then they win the SEC West, I think he's fine.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
Now here's the other thing. Now their first loss of the season was to Miami in a pretty brutal fashion where
Yeah.
A&M had a nice little lead and Miami just comes back, but we haven't really seen what Miami's made of since because they've already had their bye. So they have the win over. Wait, no, maybe they haven't. I see that they had an early game against Miami of Ohio. Um, so Miami has played Miami of Ohio. They have played B hyphen CU, whoever the hell that is, and they played Temple. Okay, so we don't know who Miami is yet. They play Georgia Tech tomorrow. They've got North Carolina next week. They've got Clemson
Yeah. I
after
mean,
that. So we'll get a little bit of and then of course they've got Florida State November the 11th. So if Miami goes and drops 3 games in the remainder of their season, then that's another thing that's gonna put Jimbo on the hot seat. Like you
yeah,
couldn't beat this team.
but if Jimbo finishes 10-2 and goes to Atlanta, I don't think Miami's three losses are going to put
Dude,
him
if
in.
you're gonna put crushed cans in your shot, can they at least be Coors Light to make you look like a football fan?
If I'm a what now?
What is all this Dr. Pepper? That's a lot
Uh,
of Dr. Pepper, man.
yeah.
That's a lot of sugar. Jeez.
Yeah. I've got to quit drinking some of those things. Um, yeah. I don't. Yeah. For one thing, I think if Jimbo can get to 9-3, 8-4, I don't think they could actually afford to fire him. I mean, because it would still cost like, you know,
I just don't think he's on the hot seat that you think he is. I think that
I don't
you
either.
know
I mean,
A and
I agree
M
with you.
A and
I
M
don't think
has
the six.
not been all those years that they had. You look at Manziel, they had quality wins.
I said
Then they
it's a fool's
had
errand,
Trevor Bradford. He had quality wins.
my
All
whole
those
life.
years they had quality wins, but then couldn't capitalize on it. They kept someone around for a while. Honestly, I think they would have been better off staying with Sumlin. I thought Sumlin was a great coach.
Their
Um,
record is almost identical at this point.
okay. And, I just, let's think about this for a second, though. Before Manziel, A&M was in obscurity. They hadn't had good teams since back in the 80s, and that nobody cared about A&M. It's like all of a sudden they
I
just
mean, they
rose out
had
of the
some.
ash.
They had some good. I mean, they had some. I mean, not they were national championship contenders, but
Mhm.
I'm under RC Slocum. Um, through they did have some good years there. I mean, but
Texas A&M
I've
was the
said for a
feature.
long time they are a.
Texas A&M. Texas
I,
A&M was the featured football team in the Burt Reynolds movie Best Little Whorehouse in Texas that was made back in the 70s. That's the last time they were relevant before Manziel.
this team. Well, now they were relevant to the extent that they didn't have the seat. I think they went. I think they had a couple 10-win seasons, but they were very relevant when they hired Jackie Sherrill. They hired him to a record contract. He
And
got hired to.
when was that? That's before my
He
time.
got hired in 1982 for a record 5 years,
The
$4 million.
80s. Yeah. Yeah. The
Now
80s.
they thought that they were had all odds on him when they hired Franchione. He was going to be the savior that turned him around.
That's what we
Mike
thought too. Yeah.
But I've said this for years, man. It's a fool's errand. They've got all the pieces. They got the fan base. They got money. They got a recruiting base. But
Mm-hmm.
nobody can win there.
Dude, let's think about this. Jalen Hurts was from Texas.
Yeah,
Okay. I can't think of names right now, but we've had lots of great players come from Texas. They
absolutely.
didn't want to stay there. They didn't want to play for A&M. They didn't want to play for Texas even. They didn't want to play for Oklahoma. They wanted to play for Alabama. And I know that some of this has to do with the position of the player and whether he can be in legit contention. If you're coming as coming in as a freshman, and no matter how highly ranked you are, if a sophomore Warren Sapp plays your position, maybe you don't want to go there.
But
I mean that.
let's be fair about something too.
Mm-hmm,
Texas A&M should be able to recruit outside of Texas for what you've got to offer. They've got a lot of tradition, their bonfire, the stuff they do before the games. Um, they have a rabid fan base. You're playing in front of 110,000 people. You're going to be playing in the SEC West. You're going to have. They've got great facilities. You've got a lot that you can offer a player.
mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like you're taking them to Vanderbilt. I mean, they've got stuff to offer. Um, that they should be able to get players, pick up one out of Louisiana or pick up one, here and there. This is not team a school that it should be impossible to recruit from. And Jimbo's shown it. He's had, three, like every one of his recruiting classes have been in the top five except for one, and it was like 16th.
Now that could be one thing that goes against him because he's had some pretty disastrous seasons the last couple years.
And when you're
If
ranked
his
third
if
and
his
second,
recruiting classes are in the top 5 and you're unable to capitalize, I
I think
mean,
his
now I
worst
think one
recruiting
year he
class,
had some injuries at quarterback.
and
Um,
he had the number one recruiting class in history too a couple years ago. Remember that?
mhm. Yeah.
And then I remember several years that he was number 5 behind LSU and Alabama was 1 and Georgia was 2. So he's had some tremendous recruiting classes. I mean, there's talent on that team.
Look, it's Texas. If he does feel that he's on the hot seat, he just needs to endorse the Second Amendment and go to some pro Second Amendment rallies, and he'll be fine. Simple as that.
Okay. Um,
And I am pro. I'm not making that a mocking. I'm pro Second Amendment. Just I don't carry one myself, but I hope that many of you do.
well, I do.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyway,
almost I'll tell you a quick story that one time. You all almost killed remember Drunk Jesus?
say again.
You remember Drunk Jesus? He used to come in, the homeless guy used to come in Jim and Nick's all the time.
Drunk
Um,
Jesus?
they called him Drunk Jesus because he looked like Jesus. He had this long hair. He was in there just about every night, man. He stayed down at the shelters and he was always drunk. I mean, you would know this guy if you saw him. He was in Jim and Nick's just about every single night,
Man,
and his
I
nickname
saw
was
a
Drunk.
lot. I mean, I don't remember a
Um,
drunk Jesus,
I
but I
almost,
remember.
I almost killed him. I almost shot him one night right in front of the
Yeah.
store. I pulled up and parked, and he opened my car door and pushed himself on top of me and was laying on top of me. And I had pulled a 38 out there and pulled it on him because I thought the guy was fixing to kill me. And I caught out the glimpse of my eyes. It was Drunk Jesus. And I was like, "What the hell are you doing?" But you remember saying, all right, let me ask you
I
this.
think that's it for this weekend. I mean, there's really not. I mean, Colorado's playing a 1-4 Arizona State.
Well, let me ask you a question
Mhm.
that we kind of talked about. Damn it, we kind of talked about the other night. That we seen Nick Saban. I mean, the Saban that we have been waiting to see,
Mhm.
we hadn't seen in a while. Um, he showed me that he still got that fire. He's fixed to turn 72 though. How much is left in the tank? I mean, can he go to 75 or 76 or 77? I
I think
mean,
78 is going to be the number for Saban because I think
he's a
Saban's gonna.
youthful, even at 72, he is a
He's a
youthful 70.
youthful 72, but I think Saban is a Paterno man. The moment Paterno stopped coaching, he just died. Now, given he had some a scandal that tarnished his legacy, that probably broke his heart, but
Bryant died.
yeah, I
Coach
think
Bryant died
Saban
6 months.
knows. I mean, and there, and it's not just football, man. There's a lot of people out there that
That died.
retire and then they just die.
One
And
of the biggest professions that happens is the army or the military. Once those guys do
yeah,
20 years,
well, I mean, it
but
happens to bankers.
coach,
I had a death in the family just last week. He was 91 years old. And, you know, I remember when my dad retired, he asked him, how do you have you not gotten bored all these years? Because he had been retired at that point I mean, that guy retired when he was in his 40s because he had heart problems. And so he had been retired already for 40 years at that point. He's like, how do you do this? My dad was bored. He's like, here's how we do it. And he also was asking, how have you and your wife been able to survive this long? Because, my parents got divorced after my dad got retired. Um, or try they long story, just got that out. They didn't actually get divorced. They filed for
I'm
divorce.
cutting the cord and we'll talk off camera now.
Well, I mean, I did have something I was gonna say, but it's okay.
Oh,
But
that's fine.
like he said that the way he and his wife have gotten along all these years was because he every morning at 6 a.m. he leaves the house, even though he's retired, and then he doesn't come home till like 4 o'clock. You know, and he, I mean, he lived to be 91. None of the other men in my family lived that old. Most of them passed away in their 60s and early 70s, and he lived to be 91. And uh and you know it I think Saban's going to be one of those guys that's not going to be able to. That's why, like,
Well, yeah, that's what
yeah,
if
seven,
you ever
8 years ago, I used to
interview with
say that.
Kiffin,
Mhm.
if you're our interview with Kiffin talking about him, and they asked him, they said, what if he asked you to go to Buffalo Wild Wings and have burgers? And he said he's not going to do that, and they said, well, just go have a beer, and he goes, he's not going to do that. And he said, that's no. He said, that's not the same. He said, besides, he said, if we were going somewhere, he said, I would get an itinerary 3 days later, 3 days earlier on what time to be there and what the conversation was going to be about and how long each topic would be last. He said, that's why he's so good. He said, there's not a second that's wasted in his day. He said, every day thing is planned out from the moment he gets up to his
Could you
phone call.
imagine that person being retired?
No. I mean,
Yeah,
what would he
I
do? I
mean,
mean,
that's why about 5 years ago, I was saying if Saban's planning retirement, he might try to become the athletic director. You
see, I
know,
don't see him wanting to do that.
yeah,
Here's what
but
I could
but
see.
but no, I mean, I don't see it now,
Here's what I
but
could
back
see.
then I was thinking there's no way he's just going to straight retire.
Here's what I could see.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you may think this sounds crazy, but it only takes a year or two. I could see him not if athletic director taking an NFL job.
Taking what?
An NFL job.
Uh,
I
Dude,
could see that.
he is a disciplining coach, and they don't allow discipline in the NFL anymore.
They, Antonio Langham, you remember, he made the interception against
Yeah, I remember.
Florida, and he played up under Stallings. They interviewed him, and he when he played at the Browns, Saban was the defensive coordinator up under Belichick, and they asked Antonio Langham about the meltdown Saban has on the sidelines, and he started laughing. He said, "Oh, that's nothing like what he was back then." He said, "We wanted to fight him every day after practice."
Wait, Antonio Langham?
Yeah, Saban was defense coordinator for the Browns in from
Oh,
90
okay,
to
okay. I got you. I
89.
got you.
Yeah.
I got
Antonio Langham was their defensive back, so they wanted to fight him every day after practice.
you. That's funny.
I mean, because I mean, I love going through. Do you remember? I mean, because I watch them all the time, but one of the best ones I ever heard was, I think it was in 2013, and AJ was on the cover of a magazine, and they asked Saban about AJ being on the cover of the magazine. And he said, "What the hell do you think I do around here?" He said, "What do you think?" He said, "I look at the paper for 5 minutes in the morning to see if it's raining, if we're going to have to practice outside. And you asked me if AJ looked about AJ being on a magazine, and I'm
I
sure he
remember
looked
that.
good, and
That's
I'm sure
funny.
he looked good." And then he goes, somebody's, all right, y'all got one more question. Y'all better make it a good one because I'm about half fired up now.
I remember that. That's the saving we need.
That's
I
what he
was
went off.
telling
He
my
said,
wife earlier tonight that because she was talking about Saban being on with James Spann. I think it's called the Hey Coach Show or something like that, and they were talking about him getting kind of fired up again, and I said, you know what it reminded me of? Now, I grew up watching the movie Bull Durham,
Yeah.
And there's a scene in that movie, Kevin Costner plays the aging, minor league player, and he's sitting there talking to coach. They're about the same age. And the coach is like, man, I just can't get these guys to listen to me. So Kevin Costner turns to him and says, scare them. They're kids. Scare them. And the coach walks in with 10 baseball bats and just flings them across the room and goes off on these boys, right? And I'm like, why hasn't somebody put the clip of that video online and it said Saban and Miss Terry? Saban's the coach, Miss Terry's Kevin Costner. Because it's one of the classic scenes in the history of
Do you know who
the
Walter Lewis is?
who?
Walter Lewis.
No, no.
He played quarterback at Alabama up under it was Bryant's last quarterback, and he's he's recognized as the first black quarterback at Alabama, even though they had another guy play like a few plays a few years before. But anyway, in Bryant's last game, the Liberty Bowl, he made some substitutions, and Walter Lewis didn't like them, and he gets in Bryant's face and starts screaming at him on the sidelines. And um, Walter Lewis used to come to Jim Nix all the time, and I asked him about this. So he starts yelling at Coach Bryant. Bryant grabs him up by the shirt and pulls him up to where they're looking at each other eye to eye, and takes his game plan and sticks in his throat and tells him something to the effect of, I'm the goddamn coach of this team. I'm paraphrasing what it was, and kind of pushed Lewis back, and he just sulks his head, went back on the field, and they said like 2 days later he went to Coach Bryant's office and just was apologized up and down for what he did, because he couldn't believe that he'd gotten Coach Bryant's face. And and I asked him about it, and he told me the whole story. And I was like, he's like, yeah, 10 years. If it'd been 10 years earlier, I'd been picking myself up off the ground.
That's funny.
Um, well, all right, man. I'm gonna got a phone call I've got to make, so I guess we'll cut it here. I'll What time's Alabama kick off tomorrow? Is it 2:30 games at
2:30.
7 o'clock?
Yeah, tomorrow's going to be an all-day, great day kind of thing because you got Oklahoma and Texas, 11 o'clock a.m. You rock and roll, and then you go right into Alabama, and then you've got Kentucky and Georgia at 6.
So you'll try to do a night recap tomorrow?
Yeah, since they'll probably wrap up about 9. One thing I would like to shout out though is I think it would be really cool. Maybe not for tomorrow's show. Maybe we could do on the prediction show if we could both watch the Nebraska documentary between now and next week.
Oh yeah, like watching and
Yeah, and watch it and
yeah.
kind of yeah.
Oh,
It's on Amazon Prime. I mean, it's for rent. It's like $5.99,
yeah,
but
I'll get.
but I think it would be. I kind of am excited to watch it just because you know that was the game that made me fall in love with football. I was just too young for anything that happened before it. And, it was
Well,
kind
let
of
me tell
getting
you,
into those years where Alabama was kind of running kind of weak.
before that dynasty, and then even after it, really up until Alabama, you had just about a different national champion every year.
Every
I mean,
year, yeah.
there's so much parity.
Miami resurfaced every now and then
Miami had a
USC
Miami won four
popped
in 20
up.
years.
Mm,
Miami had a good dynasty there. They won
yeah,
four in 20
but
years.
but they kind of had that little resurgence there in the late '90s, early 2000s. You had
Under
USC, yeah, USC under Pete Carroll. Um, but yeah, there it really was. I mean, then you had the one year, LSU won it without even playing in the BCS game
Yeah.
back in the good old BCS days.
I was,
Uh,
and forget I said this last week. Big Pimpin was seen at Baylor, the Baylor football game, wearing a Baylor shirt.
Dude, if anybody could pump life into that dead zone, I mean that
I mean, if I
I
was that way, director, I would.
when,
I
when I mean Baylor, I'd like this, and I mean I feel like the Big 12 is going to become a forgotten conference, honestly. But you know, if you can pump some life into Baylor, because when Baylor had RG3,
oh yeah,
and they were going toe to toe with Oklahoma and Texas and
oh
beating them,
yeah.
and
When Arch got
and
there, yeah.
the more contenders you have, I mean that's like the more contenders you have in your conference, the more margin for error you have, and the better you're going to be. And all these years that the SEC has been such a fierce, competitive atmosphere. I mean, that has made that. I mean, because let's look at this for a second. There is some credit to be given to LSU, Georgia, Florida,
Oh, Georgia,
Auburn.
even Auburn.
In Arkansas for coming out and giving the other teams good games. That's that there's
Mississippi State
responsible.
went to the SEC championship one year.
There is responsible for the success of Alabama and Georgia as anybody, and also those teams all doing well in non-conference play and bowl games. They've also given, you know, Alabama and Georgia, margin for error while we have been able to get in sometimes after, one loss or using or not making it to the championship game. That's what's made the SEC, and you want to see this competition. I don't like being the guy that has to say, they're dominating their conference, but is their conference really worth a damn? I don't like being that guy. I want all conferences to have some power to them.
Yeah, I want to beat the best.
Yeah, and I'd like to see Baylor resurface to some form of former glory. I'd like to see Nebraska come back. It's kind of nice seeing Florida
I would like
State
to see.
doing well right now. Yeah, I mean,
Well, on that note,
it's
man,
good for
let's stop it
football.
because I got to make a phone call before it gets too late. But I'll
Mm.
holler at you tomorrow night when we do a show.
All right, man. Sounds good.
All right, buddy. Recording stopped.